delve into specifically in certain areas that I've heard you talked about with regards to how you more or less kind of got all this all got started here for you. But then when I started listening to your background about how you kind of more or less got into the industry, and then one thing led to another, then led to another, and then here you are with this now. There was actually something quite intriguing that I really wanted to ask you, more or less to kind of start off here, because I wanted to see where, I guess the best way I could describe it is, when you first had got into the industry, it was more or less, from how I understood you described it, you just got into because, you had a passion for it. You do stand up, writing, and then the voice acting, among other things that you do as well too. And then with the discovery of your condition with I'm like forgetting everything now off the top of my head here.
Celiac.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So once you had found out you were diagnosed with it officially, then that's more or less kind of changed everything for you, pretty much your whole life. And you started with the whole dieting plans you were trying to go for, and then eventually it kind of ventured off into a more like a business side of it here too that has taken off for you. So what I was actually really curious about with you, that I wanted to get your perspective on it now, and I hope it's not a boring question to ask here for you, because I'm really interested about how things have changed for you along the way when it comes to, how you got into the business, and then this other side of the business where it was kind of by chance that had worked out for you, where you ventured off into a business venture that wasn't more or less part of your plans, but it turned out to be one that worked out very well for you. But I'm curious to see how, with the amount of stuff that you've gone through now with the dieting plans you've come up with, the recipes you're coming up with here, and then still doing your other gigs as well too. I'm just curious to see how things have changed for you along the way, as far as how you may have more or less prioritize what's more important for you, because clearly your health is a very important factor for you. So I would think that would be something that you're more focused on. And if there's money that's involved, that you're able to make off of that here as a result of what you've been able to more or less set up a passion, if you will, that led you to this path here. Has anything changed for you along the way about how you've looked at all the other things you've done before too, like the comedy, the voiceovers, that made you look at how you prioritize your business as opposed to why you initially got into it in the first place? So I hope it's not a convoluted question to ask, but I'm just want to see how that was more or less starting off for you and how you are with it now, because I don't think I've ever heard how you looked at it for yourself, other than the fact that it just happened to work out that way and things have just taken off from there from you.
Well, I think it's not convoluted. It's just a multi-parter. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's a lot of angles to it. And when you say the industry, I'm assuming you're meaning the entertainment industry.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I always wanted to be an actor, but I grew up in a place on the East Coast where you just weren't surrounded by anybody who's in the entertainment industry. So I grew up in DC, and it's a one-horse town. Everybody who lives in DC works for the government.
Yeah, I'm from there too. What part of DC are you from, or specifically?
Arlington, Virginia. I mean, everybody says DC, but then
I'm from Arlington. So were you born in Arlington?
Are you really?
Yeah, seriously.
Well, I was actually I was born in Richmond, and then my mom and dad divorced when I was 8 months old, and then that's a crazy story. But basically, my mom went to the hospital for depression for 2 years, and I moved around with people for 2 years, and then we moved up to Arlington when she got out of the hospital and was all right.
Oh, okay.
Then we lived in Clarendon off the Orange.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. That's changed. That's a whole different place now.
Arlington.
Oh yeah, very well. Yeah, I grew up there.
So
I grew up in the whole Northern Virginia area as well too. So I'm very.
Yeah, we wound up living in Sterling for a little bit, and I went to school.
I worked out
Leesburg.
of there too for a period.
Oh my
of time.
God, that's so crazy. I lived in Sugar Land, and I found out that much later, and I don't know him at all, but I just love that Patton Oswalt went to the same element, or like across the street to the other like rival elementary school, and I was like, somebody from Sugar Land. I was like, that's so crazy. Wow, what a small world.
Yeah.
Well, then very well, there's not a lot of people in the entertainment industry.
Well, you'd be surprised how much that's changed now, because when I was because when I was because I used to, as you're familiar with Arlington Hospital, of course, growing up there. So that changed now to Virginia Hospital Center. So I was born in that hospital, and I ended up working there many years later.
Wow.
But when I started working there, I worked in the department where they register patients for pre-ops and things of that nature. And I actually came across a lot of people that have worked in the entertainment industry that were SAG members living out in the East Coast, because it turned out as time has gone by, DC started getting more and more work, Baltimore specific, especially at the time with the show
The Wire,
House of Cards and The Wire as well too, because they shot a lot of their episodes up there. So a lot of work was starting to come through. So people from that area were starting to creep their way up through there and make their way back. So it wasn't uncommon for me to come across people that have worked in the industry, but it wasn't until later on in the years that I learned that through, the various people that happen to come across at the hospital. But yeah, I'm sure it's still like that now. I haven't been back up there for a couple of years, but yeah, it's definitely becoming more of a movie town, but not really a movie town, if that makes any sense. Right. I'm sure you understand what I'm getting by that.
Well, I mean, listen, stuff will always be filmed there. It has to be whenever there's anything about the government or politics or anything. I mean, the exteriors there are unlike, Washington, D.C. is a beautiful city. Yeah. And, to film, to tell a story there is really important. However, I was never exposed to it. My mom was a minister. My dad was a professor who lived in Alabama. And I split my time between the two places. And I just always wanted to do this thing, and I didn't have it role modeled, but something that my mom would let me do was ballet lessons. And so I danced for forever. And that was good because then I could go to the Kennedy Center and I could see, things like that. And because the Kennedy Center is pretty badass. And that's one thing where you're exposed to the arts in a way that's like so incredible.
It's such like a prestige aspect about it too, that I remember when I used to go there. Like, it's not like going to, I don't know, it wasn't like going to a concert. It was just something so different for me. I'm sure you got the same feeling too when you saw that level of going to performance.
A Broadway show, how everybody talks about going to a Broadway show, and don't get me wrong, Broadway productions are amazing, but the theaters are tiny because that's everything in New York is so compact. Yeah. And so from going to see something at the Kennedy Center, which is like this badass state-of-the-art place, and then you go to like the Schubert Theater, which is like kind of dark and it has a lot of history and it feels great, but it's just a totally different vibe. And I didn't realize how spoiled we were in DC with the Kennedy Center. It's just a really badass facility. And so I didn't even think it was possible. So when I actually moved to Atlanta to go to college, and that's where I got my start. That's where I worked, my first jobs. And that's where I started doing voiceover. And I was still working on camera then. And when we left, my husband and I left Atlanta with a 2-year-old and drove across the country. Right. And when we got started out in LA, because he was also an actor at the time, now he's a writer. When we got started, there was nothing shooting in Atlanta. Now everything shoots in Atlanta too, like same thing. So for me, I never thought anything was possible. So then the fact that I actually worked and did jobs and got agents and did commercials and did TV shows was so incredible to me. Like, it just really blew my mind. And also I grew up at a time where I said, ever since I was little, like, I'm going to be on television. I want to be on television. Yeah. And I actually did it. And so that was a really cool thing. But one of the things that I learned is that you got to kind of wait for the phone to ring. Now, with the advent of the internet, you can create your own content. Here we are podcasting here, that's what's kind of created this whole other career or launch into another business, as you say. And doing that and being open to that was a big deal, because back before, like, Gary Vee said, you can be a hyphenate, people were not a hyphenate. You picked one lane, you stayed in it, and then you died. Like, that was it. Like, even if you were a television actor, you wouldn't become a film actor. Right. If you were a film actor, you couldn't be in commercial. Like, it was like what you stayed niched. You niched down and you stuck with it. And but now seeing behind the scenes too, also too, how is fractionalized the word I'm looking for? Like, some people might watch Yellowstone, but then other people might watch Bravo. And then these people might watch this thing, and the audiences are fragmented. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. So it not like when I was a child and the MASH series finale was on and literally all of America watched it. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't happen that much anymore, Yeah. So when things are fragmented and you're waiting for job opportunities to happen, you better either have a really cool day job that fulfills you, or you're pursuing a business or a side hustle, or you're doing theater, or or you're training. Like, you have to keep, or you're raising a family, like something you have to keep your mind and your soul creatively occupied. Now, stand-up is a great way to do that. You could always be writing jokes and getting on stage. There's a number of ways to do that. And so when Vinnie Tortorich called me in 2012, and I was at the end of my 3-year-long depression about being on a show that was canceled. And by the way, I was working the whole time, but I was very depressed, and said, co-host and produce this podcast for me. I was like, oh God. And then I did.
It was probably one of the best decisions you've made here from
absolutely from a health standpoint. So from the lens that you're talking about of looking back on the entertainment stuff, it's funny because I'm still in it. I'm still the female voice of NBC. I still have my booth right back there where I record all my voiceover stuff. The email that I was on when we started was I narrate a murder on Oxygen called Snapped Killer Couples. And it's literally just couples who go on killing sprees. So I was writing hey, we can do it this time. And then, so I am lucky where I've created a situation for myself, at least with voiceover. For the most part, it's very flexible and I can do it remotely and also build a sauce, spice, and cookbook business and do podcasting. So that never would have been possible as a kid. That behavior it wasn't modeled. Well, first of all, it wasn't modeled by anyone in my family, but it was not modeled. You didn't see a lot of women out there like, well, I'm the CEO of a food company as well as a comedian who performs and tours nationwide. Like you just didn't what? Like you didn't see that kind of thing. So a part of it was me forging my own path. And also a part of it is now I'm old enough to understand and trust different opportunities come up at different times and don't fight them and get on the horse the way the horse is facing. Does that make sense?
It does, but does it ever get tiring at the point? Because obviously things start evolving. So you understand. So the reason I'm bringing this up with you because I want to get a different angle from your perspective.
Rob. I'm exhausted.
Well, that's the reason why I was bringing this because obviously things evolve and things have changed. But what's interesting now is because I've talked to several people in the industry in various capacities, right? And like one of the biggest things you talked about is I think you actually talked about this, I think a few years ago. I could be wrong, but because there's so many I've listened to. But one of the biggest things I think, oh no, it wasn't you, it was somebody else. I'm confusing. I'm sorry, but there's one thing that someone had brought up before that was really important now, especially for comedians, which was the fact that we brought up in previous conversation about how social media is a major factor for you to get into the door, if you will. So you could be like a YouTuber with 5 million followers. You've never done stand-up, but just because you have a large following, I want to try stand-up. The owner would probably say, I'll book you tonight. Whereas a veteran in the business who has years of experience and has a resume that's, to die for, will probably get a pushback unless their name is Dave Chappelle. Right. But with that being said, though, it seems like even though the guys who have worked hard to get to this point and they are respected within that community, it seems like they are still not able to surpass the other things that are coming up along the way that has more or less kind of pushed them back a little bit further. So I'm starting to see that with a lot of people who are becoming more and more, I guess, famous is the best way I could describe it. It almost seems as if though they're becoming famous for the things that we most don't think of what could make someone famous. So, as
sure.
Reality shows kind of made that a big thing for a lot of people who would have never had a shot in the industry. Now they have established careers. But when you're saying this from that point of view, from the very beginning, and that is how things have evolved along the way, and having to keep up with that, I know you mentioned just now you're tired, but you're still grinding through it though, because I take it that you still do it because you want to do it. You love doing this here, but
absolutely. I believe in full ownership. You have to own that you want to do things. I fully own it, and I don't like ever complaining. But sometimes I feel tired. Sometimes I feel shredded.
But you ever
and then
feel quitting
it's just,
though?
Huh?
You ever feel like quitting though? I mean, there's got to be a point.
Sometimes, I'm just being honest.
Right.
Sometimes, of course. And then I go, you know what? Maybe it's time to go for a walk, or maybe it's time to have a glass of wine, or maybe it's time to just let's stop thinking about it for a little while and then pick it back up. Because don't worry, it'll be right there where you left it. And I feel like anybody who's in anything creative, which, by the way, it doesn't have to be a creative arts job. Right. If you're an entrepreneur, you're creative. You're podcasting, you're very creative. You have to be creative to produce stuff. And it's the same energy that creates paintings, also creates businesses. So it's sometimes you do feel drained, other times you feel energized. And I think that that's very normal. I wish that people would normalize failure a little more. I think that you can authentically speak about it. You know what I mean? And because I like to hear stories of people who are super successful. I want to hear about what they've learned from their failures, because I listen to those kind of podcasts and interviews too, because I want to hear that, like, I'm not alone, because like, boy, oh boy, did I just screw something up, or something bad happened that I didn't expect. And you want to know that you can bounce back from it. It's that a whole, like, it's not how many times you fall, it's the number of times you get up.
Right. Well, here's the thing too, because I'm actually really curious to hear your perspective on this, because I brought this up before in the past with several people that I've talked about. Like in this case, for example, like we're doing conversation. But I guess sometimes I always ask people in a formality, like I would like to do an interview with, but it really is a conversation I'm listening to have. But I think just
I love it.
Out of respect, just to say, if I want to have a conversation, I don't know how it'll come off to them if I say that not knowing who I am. But as time has gone by, you could see that you have guys who you would never think of as somebody being like the head of the king of the hill, if you will, in terms of like, in this case, like Joe Rogan's a big example. Like he's like the cream of the crop at this point right now for a number of years, but that wasn't his intention. But the fact is that this platform has become something that's much larger than we anticipated, that literally anyone can do it. But what I'm trying to point out is that because things have changed along the way, it seems like I tend to believe that people are becoming more wiser to what's out there, but they're not, I'll say it straight like this, but they're not as smart as they think they are to really understand what's going on, if you will. So when you see, like, for example, when I'm listening to a podcast, I could tell some of the people that do it, they still go back with the old formula, if you will. Like they have the whole radio content approach, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but you can tell some of those who is just doing it just to try to see if it works for them, and they still stick with it because somehow they think it still works. Or you can find out who is more or less being authentic, and you find out who isn't. And it's much easier, I think, that way when you have these more longer form of like a show of this sort, or even television for example too. Because like when I look at a show like E.T., Access Hollywood, back in those days, that was my go-to for everything movies, because that was the only thing I had access to understand what they'd done to the production.
Right.
But then when you have a conversation with, in this case, like Brad Pitt going on Mark Maron, you learn more about his background, where he's from the Midwest and how he grew up.
Yeah, it's great.
Do you still
long form conversations great for that? Yeah.
But that's changed so much now, where like I said, I think people are getting wiser because it's obviously becoming much more popular, where everyone is doing it, but it's very hard to more or less stay on top unless you are Joe Rogan, who has a platform that's established at this point. So when you're seeing how things have evolved in that capacity with what you do and the various other people you work with as well too, do you notice that it's becoming a little bit more harder to maintain that momentum for certain people? Or is it easier because you don't have to worry about the numbers, but if you want to make yourself known in that field, like to have some sort of an income, is that becoming much more harder now because because everyone has access to it now? Or do you think it's just a little bit easier, but just takes a little bit longer to get to that point? So the
podcasting marketplace is glutted, if that's what you're asking. It is definitely glutted. I mean, in my opinion, there's always room for greatness. You can be good, and that doesn't always fly. I mean, listen, Vinny and I built this. I built a podcast back in 2008, where I had to update XML code to get it to say, there wasn't like a cute plugin. There wasn't like Libsyn or like Buzzsprout. Like those weren't a thing. And like there weren't like plugins where you just like upload your MP3 and type up a couple show notes and hit send, and then it goes out to all the platforms. Like that didn't exist. But then again, there was also just Apple Podcasts at the time. So, gosh, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because I feel like a lot of people have a podcast in them. A lot of people have a book in them. Does the world need another cookbook? No. And yet I have another one coming out. Well, but, you know what I mean? Like, does the world need another podcast? No. But I still record every week with Vinny. You know what I mean?
But that's the thing, though, because the thing is that because the market in virtually every aspect of the industry is saturated, right? Sure. So, and this is the part I was asking about, the giving up, if you feel like giving up, because, I mean, apart from the hard work that goes with it, but I mean, when you look at the various other things that's going on right now, like it's because I wonder if if a part of you thinks about, is it even worth me writing another book, because there's 50 million books out there that someone else is trying to promote as well too. There is some leeway for me because I have access to certain things that probably most of the other people don't have access to. But if I can't get somebody to take the time to look at it because it's oversaturated, how do I overcome that, that mental hurdle, if you will? Because
I think that you have to get out of your head in general, because I have to do this too. And you have to tell yourself, if you have the gift and the thing that you want to share, you have to trust that there are the people there who want to receive that gift.
Okay.
And you have to stop defining, like, here's the cool thing. If I go into a comedy club for a 10 p.m. show, I will be so thrilled. Let's say on a Tuesday at 10 p.m. I would be so thrilled if there were 50 people in that room, because generally people aren't going to go to a 10 p.m. comedy show, right? They're at home, they're in bed, they don't want to, you know what I mean? And so if there were a bunch of people in there at a comedy club, that would be thrilling. Now, podcast downloads, people are like, oh, I only got 500 downloads. And I'm like, so what I always visualize to myself, this is the visualization that helps me. Is I go, if I walked into a room and 500 people were in there listening, I would be so thrilled. And I want to share that energy with those people.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah, so like if you visualize it like that, so then you get up to, oh my, I got 5,000 downloads. I got 50,000 downloads. And you think like 50,000, that's a stadium. That's a very large stadium of people. So imagine if you were standing there with a microphone talking to 50,000 people, that would be awe-inspiring and you would feel humbled. So I think part of the key is with growing anything creative, whether it's a podcast or a book or pasta sauce, go to the grocery store. There's a wall of pasta sauce. Does the world need another pasta sauce? The world does not, is the answer. But then why do anything? And it's mostly because you want to share this gift, this thing that you're excited about. You want to share this with the world. And then you just have to stop taking scores so early and just trust that there are people there and they're going to gravitate to you. They just are. And then you just continually improve yourself. You continually improve your show. You continually improve your product, your packaging, your whatever it is. You just continually work on it and make it better, get really good, get undeniably good. And people are attracted to that.
What's one place that you've actually gotten more or less like a form of inspiration that you least suspected you to get it from? Because I would think that you've seen it all, the various lucks that comes with the business, and then you've seen opportunities that are more likely a given and then doesn't turn out that way. But somehow, despite the pitfalls that occurs, I mean, there's got to be something that I'm sure. Where you talked about, you were in depression mode where for 3 years, where you worked on a show that I think was I think I know what you're talking about. Forgive me if I'm forgetting everything here, but I'm sure that it was a show that was doing very well. And then once you had stopped working on there, there's got to be something that you've come across that would more or less kind of get you out of that funk, if you will, that you least suspected it from. And I'm wondering what that would be, because sometimes I think people tend to overlook certain things about themselves that I'm not going to say is like right in front of them, but if they just have the time to look around to see what could have been, if it just to absorb the environment and just understand where they're at, and maybe take the time to analyze it and realize that, what they need to deal with is right in front of them, and they just be able to handle it, as they go forward. But for yourself, though, because of the chaotic career path that you've taken here, I'm sure there's a lot of things you have to filter out. Sometimes you may not have the time to do so, but I'm sure there might be something that stuck out for you that made you realize that, okay, I can go about this route without having to overwhelm myself, if you will. So what was that turning point for you that made you feel more or less comfortable to continue on with it, despite the fact it's a path that's to most people's eyes, it will be too stressful for them?
I mean, listen, I am a lady who likes her creature comforts. It's not like I'm running around in designer handbags or anything, but security is important to me. Okay. But I'm also fiercely independent, and I'm an only child, and I've looked out for myself for many, many years. So I'm also not the type of lady who gets married and is like, well, honey, you're going to just pay the bills and I'll just, do whatever. So for me,
so you're a keeper is what you're saying.
Listen, I do my part in the household. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So no, gosh, the turning point. I'm really like a very slow person to change my beliefs about things. So I worked on a creature of habit. I'm a creature of habit in the sense that, like, I don't mind changing. No, I'm a creature of habit in it, saying that, like, it took me a while to change my beliefs about myself, that I could support myself solely by working in the entertainment industry. So I would go and shoot projects. I would shoot a whole series and then come back to do the day job. And looking back on that, I think that's actually really smart. Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, pull the money in. You need to pull the money in. You have a kid, you got a mortgage, you got a car payment. Like, what are you going to just come home and be like, stick your thumb up your ass, like, and wait for the show to come out? Like, no, you have to, like, get to work. And so I am a very hard worker. I don't doubt that, but it took me a while. In fact, I think it took me shooting 3 seasons of 2 different shows before I finally was like, you know what? I'm not going back to that day job, and I'm going to. And then boy, oh boy, did the floodgates open, because I made a decision to line up with doing that. So it's so hard to articulate, because most of the entertainment industry is luck, but then you also have to be prepared for when the luck happens and be good so that you can sustain the good luck.
Yeah.
And be in the right place at the right time. And you can't control. The only thing you can control is you being good, available, and a delight to work with. That's it. You can't control anything else. So when the opportunities come, and by the way, some opportunities are not actually opportunities. They're what you're talking about, a chance for self-reflection, a chance to go, oh, wait, hold on. Because by the way, if everything went great and you got every job and everything panned out, you would be the biggest a-hole, egomaniacal, puffy head jerk in the world. And I like to tell...
You can cuss too, by the way, just so you know.
Okay, but you're a puffy head jerk. That's really not actually my style of speaking at all. No, I have had the good fortune of shooting a lot of bits and voiceovers and sketches for the Jimmy Kimmel Show over the years.
Right.
And one of the things that they called me in for was the setup was Jimmy's coming over to Juliana Margulies' house to watch the Super Bowl. And instead, she's got her book club there, and they have Food Network playing in the background. And he doesn't get to watch the Super Bowl, and he's very frustrated. That's the setup. And the writer of it requested that I be in it. And he even put on the script of the sketch, it had my name. It was like, you know what I mean? My name, and then the lines I'm saying, and then Juliana and her lines, and then the other lady, Erica, let's call her Erica, who's in the thing. And then there's a couple of extras who were hired to fill out the room, and they don't speak, right. But we 3 have the thing. And then Jimmy walks in and we do the thing. Now, when you're doing these shows, I don't think Jimmy Kimmel would know who I am from Adam, because when you're doing these shows, you rehearse with everybody else, and then he walks in, shoots stuff really fast, and then leaves. Like, it's done. He does not have time. Everything moves really quickly.
Right.
And so before Jimmy comes down, the director comes down, who I've known and I've worked with. Now, having a speaking part in the world of an actor is very important.
Right.
It feels really good. And that's why I was there, to speak that part. The director comes down and he says, he looks at me and he looks at the extra, and he looks at me and he goes, you know what? And he points to one of the extras. He says, you say her lines, pointing to me. And I was like, wait, what? No, what? And so then I say some other lines. And he's like, no, you're just going to sit there. And I was literally like, just like steam starts coming out of my ears. Like, wait, what? You just literally, it says Anna and then my lines. You can't take that away from me. That's my part. That's why I came in here. And I started texting my husband, like, what do I do? And he's like, nothing. You don't do anything. You do what the director says. And I was like, he's right. But I'm really upset. And that whole experience made me realize, and of course, listen, I'm an improviser at heart. I improvised for 25 years. So whenever we start shooting, of course, I'm ad-libbing lines, like trying to say shit. But, and by the way, I got paid regardless. It's not like they were like, oh, you're downgraded to an extra and now you're not going to get paid. I got paid the same as if I did speak the lines, but it's really important. I want to say the lines. They're my lines.
Right. I know what you're saying.
You know what I mean? And congrats to the woman who got the line, because then she got upgraded to a speaking part. No shade on her. Oh, I know what he said to me. He goes, you look too much like Juliana, and I want to have, because the extra was blonde and they wanted to have us look different. And I was like, what? Like, no, I don't. Like, I don't look, yeah, we both have brown hair, I guess. Right. Like, but she's, you know what I mean? So it was like one of those things where it felt like an injustice happening in the moment. And that happens a lot when you're an actor, because you're low man on the totem pole until you get to Brad Pitt level, of course. But so I learned in that moment, nobody owes you anything. It can be taken away at any moment. Appreciate what you have and then just learn from it. How did that make you feel? Well, you know what it made me feel? in the moment, I felt like invisible. I felt like a piece of shit. I felt like disposable. Okay. Well, and guess what? You survived. They took the lines away and you survived. Okay, cool. You know what? Now I'm tougher. It made me a tougher, smarter, less ego-driven person for that. You know what I mean?
Right.
We all, you got to have a little bit of an ego to be able to pursue this business, or else it's just...
I think you do. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
So that's kind of an example of how I look at like the idea of reflection and the idea of like how we're going to use this to make us better. But then also to remember, nobody owes you anything. So keep a good attitude and move forward with your life, and just know that something else down the line will reward you. And it might not be a tit for tat. It might not be like, oh, there's no ending to that story where I go, oh, I got a better part on another thing. I mean, I will say they have had me back for at least 60, 65 episodes. So again, that's the part about being pleasant to work with. I didn't say anything. You know what I mean? In the moment. So then it's like, oh, we can have her back for stuff, but there's no like happy ending. Like, and then I got a series regular and became super famous. It's like, no, that didn't happen. But what I did learn was that, I gotta keep a good attitude and gotta keep my head on straight.
Did you ever, at any point as you started going through the motion with your career, was there any thoughts about, apart from the fact you were passionate about with what you're pursuing here, but did you ever have any thoughts of, I do want to be rich and famous? Like that's my goal.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Oh, I think that's very normal. Okay. And then you realize that when you hang out with any famous person, then you're like, oh no, I don't want that. Trust me. You don't want it, folks.
What was that turning point for you that made you realize you don't have to give me names, of course, but I'm just curious about what was it that you saw that made you realize, okay, that's not the path that I want to take because I see the consequences of that said path.
I mean, listen, it's not that it's not the path I want to take. I just have observed.
No, I'm talking about the fame level is what I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with fame inherently. There's nothing wrong with that. And obviously, if you get some level of fame and notoriety, there's some good things that go along with it. I'm not poo-pooing that at all.
Right.
I have noticed from my very, very famous friends and acquaintances a pattern of, there's almost like an arrested development that happens at the age the person becomes famous. And they are they behave, which, by the way, I've always said that I have a little bit of arrested development because my husband and I do a dual stand-up act about marriage, and I got knocked up at 25, and then we decided to get married, and it worked. We're still married 24 years later, but like, I have arrested development because the thing kicked in. The big event for me happened at age 25, and I always say, like, I need to work on getting a little more grown up, because sometimes in my head I'm like, I'm still 25. It's like, no, you're not. It's time to grow up. But that's what I've noticed. And that, by the way, that's a really broad observation. It's not true for everybody. And it doesn't mean that people don't have wonderful, amazing qualities, because they do. But there's a little bit of like, I don't know. It's a little weird. And frankly, I think that's why I did so well in voiceover, because the appearing on camera thing was not always my comfort zone. Even to this day? Yeah.
Really? Why is that for you, though? I mean, because I know you're referring to about acting wise, but like even in this capacity too, as I'm talking to you on camera, but I mean, what specifically does it make you feel uncomfortable about that part of you?
I'm more comfortable now, but I think that there's, even in the let's say the audition process, when you're in a room full of people staring at you and you're doing the lines, and it feels more nerve-wracking than when you're in a booth and you have somebody directing you over the headphones and nobody's looking at you and you could just do what you want to do with the thing. For me, my voice was always my comfortable space. And it's only been because I kind of went inward for many years. And it's only been in the past couple of years where I've been like, you know what? I'm going to start doing live cooking videos. I'm going to start to put myself out there more. And I mean, other than stand up, which to me, the safety of the room feels much better than the internet. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. Yeah. You talked about stand up. I was actually trying to find some of your stand up online, and I actually couldn't find anything at all as far as your stand up routine is concerned.
There's some on my site and there's some on my YouTube, but most of it, I don't put it out there.
Okay. Well, so that's what. Okay, so I didn't check actually because I looked in your YouTube channel, but I only found mostly just the cooking stuff. So I guess I have to sift through it all. So I apologize for not looking thoroughly.
That's all right.
But
you've done your research.
Well, I appreciate you noticing that. But I think what I was trying to lead into was that your stand-up routine, because when I was trying to find out, your more or less your form of comedy. Here's the reason why I'm actually leaning this question is because, in the various conversations I've heard you had in the past, and then you talking about the various things you've gone through, you obviously come across as very open and very approachable, right? But there was a part of me that wondered, has it always been like that for you growing up? Because for some people, I think it becomes very natural for them. And others, it seems like it takes a long time before they get to that point. And then it seems like it's natural because they develop that skill. But I don't know if it was something that was like that for you, because you've talked about the certain periods of, your depression and then the highs and lows of your career, and still be able to maintain more or less that outgoing personality, if you will. So was that something that you had always maintained? And I hope it's a fair question to ask, but if you've been that way, was that a way for you to do that, to more or less hide your depression and then use that a way to kind of
yes.
to express
yes
yourself?
and yes.
Okay.
It can be both.
Okay. So
I've always been a people person. I've always been an extrovert. Maybe I'm less extroverted than I was when I was younger.
Okay.
Part of it's growing up as an only child, so I crave
attention?
The camaraderie, not the attention so much. I crave the camaraderie of friends. My friends were my family.
Okay.
My mom was never there. She was working 5 jobs. God bless her. And, it's like my friends were really important to me and still are very important to me. And so I've always loved people. I'm a people person. I want to be around people. I like people until I don't. Then I need to be quiet for a little while. But I'm actually, surprisingly enough, no, I'm not like a loud, gregarious person. I am quite quiet. I like to talk to other people about their stuff. So it's funny that I talk so much on a mic because I actually am not. But I love to be around people and but also to, yes, I am a professional hider of negative emotion.
So when you're saying that though, is that because, and again, I hope this is a fair question to ask you, but is that because you don't want to deal with it at that moment, that you keep suppressing it? Or is it one of those things that right now is not the time to deal with it? I will deal with it, eventually.
Oh, I mean, listen, we all wish we were so self-aware that we could be like, you know what? Now's not the time to have that emotion, but I am going to definitely deal with it, Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. or like with my therapist. But you know what I mean? Like, yes, again, yes and yes.
Okay.
Definitely. But I if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have been like, no, I don't suppress anything. But now I know for sure I do. And part of that was because I did synthetic psilocybin.
Not familiar with that at all.
Well, it's basically mushrooms, but it's in a pill form. And my friend got it off of the dark web. This story sounds like it could end in disaster. Like, I'm surprised you're not dead, lady. I'm not. I was fine. And no, he already had tried some, and he was like, "This is great." And he goes, "You can take one of these when you feel like you want to do a little introspection."
Okay.
And I was like, "Okay." And listen, my husband he's done so much work on himself through the use of psychedelics. So he was like, "Go take it, sit outside, and then I'll come check on you," or whatever. and there was a point. Where I was like, "It's not working. It's not working. It's not working." I'm playing like Candy Crush on my phone, like waiting for it to kick in, sitting on a lawn chair in my backyard by myself. And then it kicked in, and then I just started weeping, like an uncontrollable weeping. And in that moment, I did realize it's like, oh, I don't like to cry. I'm not a crier. I always tell my husband, I'm like, you're lucky you don't have one of those wives who cry a lot. By the way, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's something wrong with me because I don't cry a lot. And so I'm just like weeping, like the ugly cry. You know what I mean? Like where it's like that deep, like guttural, like
so
you
like
feel like
all
you
the
might
emotions
die.
you suppress
yes.
exploded pretty much is what you're saying.
Coming out.
Yeah.
And then he comes over and he's like, "I think it kicked in." I was like, "It has." And so I was just like, and by the way, I wouldn't trade that experience for the world, not seeking to do it again. It's not my thing. But again, I was like, but that's because I'm a weenie and I don't want to feel sad. But there's unprocessed grief. I know that there is. I know that there is. And that's what it kind of showed me. So yes. So do I realize it happening in the moment? Sometimes. Do I get angry, sad, scared? Yeah, of course. Of course.
Okay. So here's what I'm curious about with you now, because you've grown as a person, of course, and the various things you do. I'm sure there's some things along the way you've touched upon before on in various parts of the conversation where you've learned how to deal with things. But I think what I'm want to lean towards more with you is that when you have, so for example, if someone is, I'm going to use you talking, coming up with recipes to help people in eating healthier. But if you have somebody that comes up to you and if you're having I'm sorry, I meant to say, if you're having a bad day, you're having those moments where you are more or less fighting to keep these emotions contained.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have someone come up to you and say, by the way, I'm bringing this up for a reason, because there's a post you made rather recently where someone, I think, had asked you, where can I get your recipe? And you said, well, it's in the link above, or you can go to the website.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, that happens a lot. I mean, that, yeah.
So, but what
where are the ingredients on your, where can I find the ingredients of your products? I'm like, where you're looking?
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm pointing this out here is because when you have those moments where, because again, you're because even now as we're speaking, you're very social, but I'm wondering if you have those moments where you're in a bad spot and then someone approaches you and says, and asks a simple question as, where can I find your ingredients? Right at that moment. Are you good at, because this is the part I was really curious about with you, if you're good at suppressing it, realizing it and learn it, okay, we'll deal with it later, or is it an automatic thing for you to just react to the situation and automatically suppress it, suppress whatever emotions you're going through at that time? Because from my experience with people I've heard talk the way you have, it's like, it almost seems like an automatic thing where they're able to push aside their emotions and focus on somebody else instantly without any second thought. It's normal for them to do that. But there have been times I've come across people who have the same type of habit where they just couldn't hold it and then they explode. So I'm curious about if you have those particular moments for yourself, not necessarily under those exact circumstances.
On anybody.
Okay.
I might have wanted to, but no, never. I almost always, I have learned that somebody asking a dumb question, or what I call the temper tantrum. I've learned about the temper tantrum because I've experienced all of the things that you go through when you find out you can't eat a certain food. And then you find out you have a health issue and then you have to do this or that. And then you think you've solved it, but then you haven't, and you've got to change this other thing. So I have lived the temper tantrum and still go through it with dairy. Like, dairy is my last holdout, where my doctor's like, you can't have dairy, it's making you sick. And I'm like, you can pry dairy from my cold dead hands. And it's not great. And I get it. So I am very, very aware of what are the trigger points for people. I also am like very aware of when your child is diagnosed with something. I get a lot of moms writing me, and a lot of dads too, writing me saying, hey, my kid has, insert the thing. Can you help out with this thing or that thing? And I always want to help or be of service. However, there have been times very few times where I've had to draw boundaries with people because they've crossed a line.
In what capacity you might cross the line? What do they do for you to?
Like somebody just writing a nasty thing, somebody just being nasty for the sake of being nasty. And again, I still know, even though I read that, I go, oh my God. I go, that's their problem. If somebody you've never met on the internet makes you that upset that you write such nasty things, like, there's obviously a disconnect. Like, I have to go, even though I see the words and immediately go, I have to go, oh yeah, well, this is weird. That doesn't make sense. Like, a person who is in a loving, happy place, or even an even keel place. Maybe you're not in the biggest joyful place, but at least I'm contented. I'm good. They don't write things like that. So it's like hurt people. You know what I mean? That whole thing. So anybody who's writing really nasty things or having a temper tantrum, I tell them, hey, listen, I understand what you're going through right now because I went through it. For example, I had a lady write me who was really upset because some of my recipes had dairy, and she had heard that that they were all dairy free. And I was like, hey, listen, I understand where you're coming from because I'm not supposed to have dairy. That being said, my second cookbook is 85% dairy free, or you could make the recipes with easy adjustments. So I have that physical solution for you. However, please understand that you're going through the temper tantrum phase, and I understand that. And then you're always allowed, this is what we were talking about earlier about taking extreme responsibility for your own behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to write me an angry thing. You could just return the book. You could burn the book. You could wipe your ass with the pages. You know what I mean? But it's like, you have to take responsibility for where you are in life. But you do, though.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Ultimately, for example, that woman who was really upset about the dairy recipes, she wound up apologizing for how she spoke. And I was like, I thank you. I appreciate that. But also, again, I understand it's not about me. None of this is about me. It's about what she's going through. And a lot of that, being vulnerable online and being myself and telling the dumb story of me weeping on psilocybin. Yeah, somebody might hear that and be like, well, she's just drugs. Okay. Like, I don't care. Like, that's not going to bother me. But if somebody else listens and goes, you know what? I feel like I could use, I'm going to ask my therapist about it. Like, if it helps one person, then I don't care if somebody's a dick about it. You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying.
I mean, I prefer people not to be dicks. I don't want to be a dick to anybody. I feel like we could do a lot more to uplift each other. That's kind of like what I want my vibe to be. I want to be an uplifting force for people. I don't want to be negative, but I'm also a realist and I'm a comic. And when people behave absurdly, I'm going to point it out.
Do you think though
that was kind of a long-winded?
No. It's a good one because I was going to lead into this because you brought something up that caught my attention here about how your perspective here, because I think maybe because of the industry I work in, people are stupid. Sure. That's the general consensus that I have about how most people tend to react when you look at.
But you know why? Because we're trained by our parents and by society, and everybody's well-meaning, but we're trained to not listen to our own intuition, our internal guidance. We're trained to not take a look at everything before we open our mouths. We're trained to just instant gratification. You know what I mean? So I understand why. Right. I don't think people are inherently stupid. We're trained to act stupid.
But that's the point I was getting at here, because because I'm sure since you've brought up before about the various people that you've interact with online or maybe even in person as well too. But the thing that I'm curious about with you though is because there's apart from the hurdles you deal with when it comes to the dry spells, getting the next gig and whatnot. But then you talked about just now with the criticisms you're dealing with here too, and you're talking about being understanding of the person's position. They talk this way because clearly they have a lot of problems, and it's not me; it's clearly them. But what's interesting for me though is that I'm sure that's something you've learned along the way to develop that skill to communicate with people that way.
Yeah,
to be patient. Sure. But I'm also wondering too if it comes to a point, if it becomes too overwhelming when you realize that, even though I'm doing this, I've had this conversation with someone else recently, someone else with the exact same problem is coming with the exact same critiques.
Yeah.
And I'm doing the exact
I get the
same
thing questions again. Over and over again.
Right.
Yeah,
and it starts to become a bit overbearing at times. So I'm wondering how you've learned to develop the callous or the skills to learn to overcome that for yourself and preparing to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I've had to do is go, you know what? I get the same question about this, that, or the other thing.
Right.
Let's take lately I've been doing on my Instagram, I take a screenshot of the DM
I see.
that they're asking me and just answer it for the public. Because why not? Why not turn it into content? Don't take it personally. And also, I don't have to, here's the thing. I have it in my nature to want to be a mensch and be helpful. And I want to answer people's questions because I wanted my questions answered. You know what I mean? So I want to do unto others as I want done to me. Right.
Right.
But I found that I spent a lot of time stopping my life to get into the email to answer somebody else's question. And so repeatedly I would answer these questions with a really long, well thought out answer. And then I would just never hear back from the person. So I don't even know if it landed or not.
Yeah.
So then I was like, you know what? Let's take this. If I've taken the time to write this, let's turn this into content that will help other people if they're looking for that particular answer. That can be search content on my website. That can be a blog post at Substack. That can be a thing on Instagram. So I can answer common cooking questions on YouTube. Like I try to turn it into content that will help everybody. That's how I've dealt with it.
Well, how did you come up with the idea to start doing that? Was it something that just came more or less naturally for you to do that, or did you speak with somebody to spark the idea to be able to post those DMs, those messages that are sent to you out on social media to be able to do? I mean, where did that thought process start for you to do that?
I don't know. I just I think I was messing around with the green screen feature on Instagram, and then I saw a picture of a pizza, and then I was like, oh, this is fun. What if I did this, and answered questions? And it also affords me the opportunity. Like I think the last one I did, because this happens all the time. People write, "Hey Anna, I'm a big fan," and then they're like, "Don't even follow me on Instagram." I'm like, and so I'm like, "Well, if you're a big fan, why don't you follow me? You'll learn the answers to your questions." But no, I feel like it just kind of, once you've been doing this for as long as I have, everything becomes like content. Like today, I made lunch and I made ground beef and I put my own taco seasoning on it, and then put I made some lime cilantro salsa verde and put that on there. And then I was like, I actually didn't film it. Like and so that I was like, I should be filming this. Right. So I'm now used to like filming every single thing. And my husband like waiting with his plate, like, all right, can you be done filming that so I can eat? But yeah, no, you just kind of train your brain for it to look for what's going to be topics of conversation for the podcast, what's going to be great questions to answer, what's going to be, a strategically good, timely recipe to post. It's St. Patrick's Day coming up. So I'm going to post the, corned beef with cabbage thing. You know what I mean? Like things like that. Like you just kind of like start to train your brain to do that.
So, here's what I wanted to kind of go back with you here real quick. Because I want to do this now before I forget. Because in the beginning, we talked about, you grew up in Arlington. I actually wanted to delve back into that here because it's not often to come across somebody that was raised around there. So I'm actually curious to see what it was like for you growing up and see if there's some similarities that what I have grown up with here, if you have also experienced it yourself too. Because you said that when you were growing up in Arlington, it obviously wasn't the movie town that DC is, I should say, that is now. But growing up for you at that time, because for me, I remember, Clarendon, Rawson at that time was nowhere near the place that it is now. It's become like night and day. It's flourished. It's becoming like bougie, I think is the term that I've heard people describe it out there.
That's what I hear.
So,
no, and it was not. It was pretty gritty. And I would walk down to Boston Common Mall, which was a crappy mall, and work at Walden Books.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And get my lunch every day from the Great Steak Escape at the food court. And hey, it was a thing.
Did you ever go over to Bob and Eat out on Columbia Pike just before the 395 exit?
I mean, I know Columbia Pike, but I don't know Bob and Nate's.
Bob and Edith.
Bob and Edith. No,
never. Oh, really? I'm surprised you never actually been out there. Oh, that's interesting.
But also remember, I left when I was 14 and I went to boarding school. And so then a lot of my formative time, I didn't come back. I came back for 2 summers and then that was it. I left.
Oh, okay. So you haven't been back in quite some time then.
No, not just, just to visit family, but no, it's been a lot, and I'm much older than you. So like, no. So yeah, but trust me, it was very, I'm familiar very different.
Right. I'm very familiar with that part of the town. Cause I think so based upon with what you're describing to me, I think you kind of left at the tail end when the transition slowly started to come through. Cause I remember it was quite literally, I think it was, to me, it felt like it was overnight, where Boston Common Mall was not the place that it is now. I mean, now they have the ice hockey rink over there where the Capitals practice out of.
What?
Yeah, I'm being serious.
Really?
Yeah, they have a movie theater there as well too. Yeah, it's literally night and day. If you go back now, if you actually come back, you would never recognize it.
I wonder if I'd get lost. Like if even the streets are the same. You know what I mean?
The streets are the same.
Streets? Okay.
No, the streets are still. Last I've been there, and because I have friends who still live up there, family still live up there as well too. So they pretty much tell me more or less what the area is like, but it's definitely night and day. But I remember as a kid growing up that it was bare bones, but it was starting to fill up a little bit further. And now it's literally to the point where I remember Columbia Pike it was just nothing but storefronts.
Yeah.
Now turned to townhomes. So it's literally just a whole different environment altogether now. So if you go back, you're not going to recognize the place anymore.
What
now
was
I'm
it?
pretty sure
It was Joanne Fabrics, but it wasn't Joanne Fabrics. That was Daneman Fabric Store. It was off Columbia Pike.
Remember that?
But that was my first job.
Okay,
like my first actual like
Columbia Pike and what street? Do you remember the crossing street?
I don't remember.
I'm sure
they tore it down. It was junky fabric shop, but I loved it. I thought it was great.
It's interesting. You don't remember Bob and Edith or ever been there because Bob and Edith is like a staple in that part of the area there too. That's really interesting.
Is that a restaurant?
Yeah, it's like a good old.
We didn't go to restaurants.
American,
like a diner.
Pretty much. Yeah.
My mom would never pay for good. She paid for McDonald's and that was it.
Well, I mean,
that's a whole other podcast.
Right. No, I've heard that conversation before. Yeah. But when you think about it now, I mean, is there elements of that part of your life that you miss that if you reflect on it, that you take away with the good times that you've had growing up there? Because since you haven't gone back, I mean, because I'll be frank, when I left Northern Virginia, I never wanted to go back because it's too congested, it's too crowded, and I live out here in North Carolina now, but it's definitely changed from when I was a kid. And as selfish as it may sound for me to say this here, but I actually preferred what it was like for me back then than what it is now. I appreciate what it is now, but not for me to want to stick around and live there anymore. But for yourself though, growing up at that time, were there some good things? Are there good memories you've had that you've taken away from that?
Oh, of course. And I appreciate here's the thing, like, I don't know. I have beliefs that we chose all this stuff for a reason and it made me stronger and it's all good. I mean, listen, even being able to, back then you would let your kid ride the metro somewhere, like a kid, like I was a latchkey kid riding the metro by myself. And it was just, and then you would call when you got to because we didn't have cell phones. It's not like I could text my mom and be like, okay, I'm on the train, And so no, I mean, absolutely have the fondest memories of all of it. And also too, there was an element too that was different back then, like in our condo building that we lived in off of Old Glebe Road.
Oh, I know.
That was probably first, second, and third grade. And it was just
which elementary school did you go to up in Arlington? Patrick Henry?
Was it? I think it was Patrick Henry.
I used to go to that school too.
Yeah. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
And then we moved out to Sterling for 4th and 5th grade. And I was like, this place is weird. It's very suburban. Like I didn't get the suburbs. Like, in fact, Sterling back then was like
farm. It was nothing but farm back in those days. Yeah.
I called WAVA and was the 14th caller or whatever. And won Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual record album from WAVA. And they're based in Arlington. No, WAVA was the pop station, 105.1 back then.
WAVA was a Christian. When I was growing up, it's a Christian station now.
Oh, is it? No, it was the pop station back then.
Oh,
and I was so excited that I won I won anything. You know what I mean? But especially a Cyndi Lauper record. Like I was so excited. And then my mom was just pissed off because she had to drive it back into Arlington down Route 7 to go get it because the traffic's so terrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I insisted. I was like, it was literally the highlight of 4th grade or whenever it happened. And the DJs, and I'm like 10 or 9 calling in, and the DJs made fun of me. They're like, oh, you're Sterling out there with the cows. And I was like, yeah. Like, I was so like, and then what's crazy? Those exact DJs that I won the thing from. So I was on a show called Free Radio, which was about the radio industry. Mm-hmm. And those DJs they're no longer there, obviously, because now it's a Christian station, but they reached out to me. One of them reached out to me a few years after I was on that show. And he was like, hey, you're Anna from Free Radio. What's his name? Mike something. He was like Mike in the Morning. And he was like, Mike in the Morning. I was on WAVA 105.1 in DC. And I was like, yeah, I know who you are, bro.
You're not talking about Don and Mike,
I won the record from you. Huh? Don and Mike. That was it.
Don and Mike. Okay, yeah.
So it was Mike from Don and Mike. Mike O'Meara, that's his name.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah.
Yeah. And he reached out to me on Twitter, and I was like, "This is literally my life has come full circle. I love it. This is great. I don't need anything else. I'm good."
Yeah, they actually hosted their own. They had an afternoon show years and years later. So when Howard Stern was becoming really big back in the 80s and the 90s and whatnot, they started their own show too in the afternoon on 106.7. I forgot the name of that station.
That was the other Pops.
Yeah. So,
station.
Well, at that time, if I recall correctly, it was
at
more
the rock station.
It was a rock station, but it was mostly known for the talk show because they had what's it called? The Sports Junkies, I think is what they were called. And then the Don and Mike show, which was like 3 to 5 or whatever it was. And they were huge.
Don Geronimo and Mike O'Meara. Yes. I'm remembering now.
And I remember they were DJs in the morning as well too, but I don't remember them being on 105, which you just happened
to were when I'm telling you, when I was very young and they were like mocking me. And I was because I lived in Sterling.
But
yeah, and they weren't wrong.
They weren't wrong. Well, they I don't know what they're up to now, but I do remember them. It's really weird though, because I remember Stern, Don, and Mike, and at the time Elliot and more. I think he still does the stuff now over in DC. But those were the guys that more or less kind of inspired me to want to do this. Because I liked their approach. Great. So with how they did stuff, awesome. And so it's funny that the local guys were more or less kind of that loose inspiration, and you happen to know who they are too. Okay, well, so here's what I'm curious with you now, because with the way things are going for you right now, I know that you talked about a new book that you're working on right now, but what I'm really curious with you though is when it comes to the various things that you have worked out, that you're working out to start more or less, trying new ingredients, new jobs you're trying to get here. Mm-hmm. Does it ever become a little bit overwhelming with having to keep hustling through with the next set of gigs that you're having to do? So here's why I'm asking this here for you. Because this is the part that's really interesting about anyone who's in the industry that I always want to delve into further, because since you've been doing it for, I think at this point, you mentioned you started doing this back in the mid to late 2000s, if I recall correctly. Is that
for
right?
acting?
Yeah, for acting.
I mean, I started in the 90s in Atlanta, but
no, I'm talking about in Los Angeles though.
Because you in Los Angeles, yeah, since 2002. Yep.
2002. Okay, so for over 20 years at this point.
Yep.
Because it's a constant grind, and we've touched about it before, but I actually want you to go a little bit further here with me, because I really want to hear your perspective on this. What's interesting for me though is that for anyone who's been able to maintain a consistent career for a lengthy period of time, despite the highs and lows that comes with it, I always find the people that have been able to do this for the longest tend to be the people that aren't what's the best way I could say it, that most people don't ever heard of before. I guess it's the best way I could describe it.
I call them the journeyman working actor.
That's the word, I guess. Thank you.
Yep.
But the reason I'm pointing this out is because I always find, someone as yourself, like I've talked to Louis Mandylor before, because he's been in the industry for over 30 years. And I'm not saying I don't really care for the fame and the glory. I really don't. But I'm interested in hearing about how they've been able to open up those opportunities for themselves, which is why I found your story to be really interesting about how the path you've taken with cooking, whatnot.
Yeah.
And that seems to be going pretty good for you. But despite the fact that you found more or less a new path to maintain this career that you're going through here. I'm not sure how difficult it is for you to have to maintain a positive outlook for that, because you've talked before what you're doing to keep that, but to do this for this long, knowing the rough patches you're dealing with here, and you've talked before about you felt like quitting, but you still do it because you love it. But there's got to be something else as well too that I wonder where most people will quit, especially after this lengthy period of time. Because I've listened to a lot of actors who've quit after being in the industry for decades, and they just never care to come back for one reason or another. But the ones that continue doing that despite the highs and lows, I'm always curious to see about, from their perspective, why they still want to maintain that despite knowing that tomorrow maybe all this will be taken away. There's a possibility that the podcast, my gigs that I have for voiceover, acting, stand-up, the ingredients I'm doing right now to sell for this new book that I'm writing here, someone can just say, we don't care, and then boom, it's taken away like
Absolutely.
That.
Yeah.
And knowing that could be a possibility for you, how are you learning to prepare to deal with that and having to get basically come from the ground up again? Are you still planning on, well, I'm going to just keep going forward despite what's been taken away from me? Or maybe this is a time for me to try something completely different and this is past me now?
I mean, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Because anything could be taken away at any time. My
Right.
friend Eddie, about 3.5, 4 weeks ago, went to the gym on a Sunday and collapsed. He's 45. And turns out he had an aortic dissection, which is the thing that John Ritter died of, which means his aorta ripped up and blood, like it was crazy blood flow. They had to reroute his femoral artery. He wound up losing a leg. He lost a kidney. But he's alive.
Right.
He's now in the rehab facility, not like alcohol rehab, but like a rehabilitation facility, where it's not the hospital, but they're trying to, he's got to do the dialysis. He's going to have to redo his entire existence, his entire life, but he's alive. He has his family and his friends, obviously. And so it's such you could one day be at the gym and just keel over and have an aortic dissection and lose a leg and a kidney. And then what do? You keep going. I just feel like as long as you're breathing air, you keep going. So I don't necessarily plan for the worst case scenario, because I do have a belief that if you plan too much for plan B, then what you put your attention on tends to manifest. So focus on growing the things that you can to the best of your ability while you can. And if at any time something is taken, because yes, of course, things happen beyond our control. Something's going to get us all eventually anyway. Right. And also too, it's also okay to go, like you were talking about with actors who were like, I'm kind of done. It's also okay to be done with that and do something else. I will say, I have observed, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I have observed that in our society, we seem to be okay watching older women cook. We still seem to be okay with that prototype of the older lady cooking. So while I may not be able to be in a sitcom at that moment, while there may be fewer roles for older ladies in sitcoms, we still seem to be okay with watching older ladies cook. So for me, that gives me a little bit of peace of knowing, okay, I see people who look like me and older out there, because representation is important.
Right. So you don't, I guess what I'm trying to ask is that this isn't your identity. Like this career isn't.
No, I mean, listen, that's where you have to that's where it takes some deep work.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, I think it's interesting because we all try to find things outside of ourselves to become our identity.
Right.
And I like my husband and I worked on years ago in therapy, that in couples therapy, if our relationship is not okay, I can't go out into the world and make my way in the world. And his attitude was, if his career out there in the world is not okay, he can't come home and make his way in the relationship. And I was like, if we can't figure out how to bridge that divide, because everything comes back to you doing your individual work anyway, right?
Right.
And so, and if you can't figure out how to bridge that divide, so it made me acutely aware when going through that experience. So I just think that trying to disassociate your identity with your successes is very important, because you know what? No one cares. No one cares. Ultimately, no one cares.
Right.
What they care about is, are you a good person? Are you a lovely person? Are you a loving person? Are you fun? Are you, you know what I mean? Your legacy will live on in your treatment of others. And it won't be like, wow, she said some promos for NBC for many years. Like, no one cares.
Right.
You know what? She gave me some recipes that helped my family. I appreciate her, but mostly it was the energy behind it. You know what I mean?
Right.
We don't want to identify that, but it usually is. You're like, you get a vibe on somebody.
Right. But do you care about your legacy because what you just made that statement about no one cares? So I'm curious about your perspective on.
I mean, yeah, I care about my legacy, but really, how long does a legacy last? Do you know what your great grandfather worked on? Right. I don't know what mine did. I have a story. I know that what was always told to me was that on my mom's side of the family, my grandfather's great-grandfather and Jimmy Carter's great-grandfather were brothers. And there were originally 3 of them. And one settled in North Georgia, one settled in South Georgia, and one went out west in a stick-em-up gang. Like what? That's obviously like a family story that's been told for a while. But other than that story, I have no idea. I know my grandparents came over from Italy, and that's pretty cool that they did that because here we are.
Right.
And then my dad, my daughter is getting our Italian citizenship for her and myself. And I asked my dad if he wanted in on it. And he was like, do you know how hard my parents worked to come over here? And now you're like, oh, yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, but you know what I mean? So it's like legacy is like, it's one of those things that we're like, I want to have a legacy. Yes. Of course, we all want to have a legacy, but if you think about it, it really is kind of ego driven. And so it's like, well, okay, well, how much can you really expect to do? If it drives you, if that's your motivator, if that's your permission slip for going out there and doing wonderful things for the world, great. But don't fool yourself into thinking like, I'm going to have a legacy. I don't know. I don't want to be pessimistic.
I think that's a realistic point of view though. Okay. So then let me ask about this here. Then what has been the one part of your career where you had reached your limit, where you realized that I can't do this anymore because this has become either too overwhelming, too exhausting, too taking too much time away from my family or myself or whatever the case may be? Where has been that point that you've come to that limitation for yourself where you realize enough's enough?
There have been very few things because here's the thing. Generally, if you notice something that's too much, when you draw a boundary for yourself, things have a tendency to kind of work themselves out, or you'll just be inspired to say, you know what, I'm not doing this thing anymore. And that's okay. So there's never been some point where I'm like, oh, I'm at a breaking point, you know? I think I'm too sensitive to let things get to that point. I may not cry a lot, but I feel my feelings enough to know.
Do you think things happen for a reason though? And I'm asking this question to you.
Of course.
Okay. Well, so that's what I want to ask you. Why do you personally believe that things happen for a reason?
Because in my little pea brain, that's how I have to make sense of things, or else we would just live in a random chaotic world, and that's not okay.
Okay. Well, because I'm asking this here because and understand when I'm asking this question, this is not me certainly trying to say, you know, well, you're wrong. That's not where I'm getting at here, but I'm just curious to hear your perspective on this point of view because I've come to a point in my life where I tend to believe that things don't happen for a reason. And the reason why I say this because this is the one thing that I've noticed for myself, that when people say that is because things are going well for them. Maybe not to the point where like everything's working out for them, but things have turned out okay, where things have worked out, where of course they're going to say that. And that's not me trying to be pessimistic or negative. It just looks that way to me, because if I see someone else who's busted their ass and they're working hard at something and just never works out despite their best efforts, which is a story I rarely ever hear. And of course the circumstances might be different for them. So you have to actually delve into their story to understand that whole journey. But if things aren't working out well for a person, despite their best efforts, or if they're born into a shitty situation where the outcome is nothing but, in this case, let's say death, where they're just fucked at that point. And I think to myself, how can you explain for that being a reason? And I'm hope this doesn't come up me trying to be philosophical or like that, because that's not the point. But it just seems that when things are going well for people, and I'm listening to your story, and it's a great story that I've come across, which is why I wanted to talk to you. Because there's certain things you have said in various other conversations that really spoke to me about how you look at things that I really do appreciate. But I also wonder too, if a lot of it comes to where people think, I believe this stuff and things are going well for me, but I also believe things happen for a reason because things have worked out. You discovered about your disease, and then you discovered about what works for you to be able to live, you know, a healthier lifestyle.
Well, but here's the thing. We don't learn anything when things are going well. I may have mentioned that earlier. We only learn from assholes or bad news or someone dying.
Right.
Or, you know what I mean? That's when we go, oh crap, time to circle the wagons and get this dialed in emotionally,
right,
spiritually, mentally, whatever. Because If I hadn't been diagnosed with celiac, maybe my life would have taken a different course.
Right.
And that's okay. Who knows? I don't know.
Right.
I do think that like whenever I make my return into the non-physical, I would like to see what that probability would have looked like. I think probabilities are an interesting thing, but people say things happen for a reason, and you're right. You still have to own the fact that sometimes bad things happen, and you have to own that it happened for a reason. I mean, I guess one of my biggest examples to date would be my mom passing away suddenly.
Right.
And then I don't even know if that happened for a reason, or if it was quote unquote a karmic event, meaning like it was meant to happen, like that was her exit point. And I don't know, because I don't know what the answers are, but all I know is that I continue my relationship with her and continue healing myself and those parts of myself. So I don't know about things happening for a reason. I think that things just happen, and then we just learn from them and learn more about ourselves. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So, so basically, with what you're describing to me, because again, I'm going with what you said before, because I asked before if you believe things happen for a reason, and you said yes. But right now, with what you just said there, it almost sounds as if though you're not 100% sure. Is that kind of a fair
I guess it's like I don't have the authority to say that happened for a reason.
I see what you're saying. I got you now.
I believe things happen for a reason, because things happen. There's nothing constant but change, right? So things are going to happen whether you like it or not, is I guess a better answer I should have said.
Okay.
Things are going to happen whether you like it or not. Are you going to observe your response to them and see what your relationship to things are and how you feel about yourself moving forward?
Right.
Or are you just going to go, well, this bad thing happened, so I'm going to harp on it, or this good thing happened, and now that's my identity from now on? Like it, I appreciate you asking what is really an ephemeral thing. It's really hard. And I think it's something that in the pursuit of creativity,
right,
that we're constantly trying to figure out what that thing is.
Right. Do you, the way things are going for you right now, are you happy with yourself? Are you happy with your life? You're happy with your career? Because again, you've had a lot of highs and lows. And I'm sure with the success you've had, maybe the success to you is more about maintaining that, being a good person, and being a good person in a career that you've taken on, that you have been successful, whether you've had those highs and lows, but you've maintained some sort of consistency with your career, but may also maintain more or less I guess the best way I could describe it is your humanity. Like you maintain that good part of yourself consistent with all the highs and lows you experience. Obviously everyone has those good days and bad days, but learning from that and getting to this point where you are right now with yourself, are you much more happier when you look at how things have gone for you and you look at yourself as a person, say, yes, I believe that everything I've gone through made me the person that I am, and I'm very happy with who I am as a result of those experiences to where I'm at this point?
Unequivocally, yes, absolutely. Okay. And I think that comes along with, aging. You either can get super ornery about how things didn't work out the way you wanted them to, right, or you get hopefully some sage, loving towards yourself and others, and go, you know what, it's all right. Things are pretty good.
Do you ever think about looking? I'm wondering if you actually look at some of your past work, because this is interesting for me to ask you about this, because
I don't look at past work. I don't like that.
So why don't you like that for yourself?
Because you're a different person when you created it, and it doesn't always make me comfortable to look at that. Every now and then.
Does that include like the podcast you do yourself? Like when you host with
I've never listened to a single podcast that we've done.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I lived it. I don't need to listen to it again.
I see what you're saying.
I mean, listen, I produced it for many years, so I would have to listen to bits and bobs, but no. And I mean, I actually now I do some interviews from people in the low carb space that I put on my Substack, and I will listen to those because I need to go back and edit show notes and whatnot. But for the most part, no.
What happens if someone comes up to you right now and say, because I know you had because I looked at your IMDb, you had a part in The Killing Joke, if I recall correctly, right?
That's right.
But if someone comes up and says, hey, by the way, I saw you're in this movie, can you sit down and watch it with me? Would you do that with them to, go through that experience for them?
I might be more, I mean, listen, I hear my voice all the time on TV and on radio, like just in passing. And so that doesn't bother me as much. Although I always go, they put a lot of EQ on that because I don't think I sound like that. But I'm not. It's never
EQ, what does that mean? EQ.
They do compression and EQ. They do different filters and effects, like before they put it on the before they put on the air. They do a lot of editing stuff. No, listen, I love that I did that movie because that was my my scene was with Mark Hamill, but of course I'm not actually recording with Hamill. But like, for me, it was like a huge childhood dream realized to be able to be, first of all, in a Batman movie, and second of all, and luckily Bruce has had me back for a couple of his projects, and I just love all of it, and I'm a huge nerd and it makes me happy. But so if somebody said let's sit down and watch it, I would be like, oh no, I'm not gonna I don't need to do that. If the scene played, I might I don't know, maybe. So I'm not that uncomfortable or precious about it. I just don't. I feel like I'm moving forward. I always want to move forward. Like, it's almost like, when actors shoot movies and then they have to go and promote them. And it's like, they shot that movie like 2 years ago. Right. Same thing with video games. Cause I'll get messaged or tweeted, hey, you did this voice. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then I have to look and be like, oh, that's that game. They used a code name. Then yeah, I did do that. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's cool. And it's glad. And I'm a gamer too. So I like to play the games. And in fact, I've done a number of things in Elder Scrolls Online. And I was like, well, I'm going to go play the world because I love Skyrim. Right. So I'm going to go play the world and see if I can find one of my characters, like a Khajiit merchant or whatever. But I've done a number of characters, but I was like, or this Nord, whoever the fuck. And so I love that world. I love that world. And so I go and I play it, and it's just like people yelling at each other. And I was like, oh, fuck this. I canceled the membership. I was like, I can't do it. And I don't have the patience for it. So I did not go find my character.
So what's one thing? What's one thing that you have what's that line in the sand for you that you would never do in terms of your acting, voiceover, that is a no-go for you at all? I mean, do you have like I wouldn't do like porn or whatever. No, not that there's anything wrong with porn. I mean, but like a porn cartoon, like a voice. I wouldn't voice that. Well, I guess what I'm actually more referring to, because I mean, that is an answer to the question, but I think I'm actually leaning more towards like so for example, like a Monsanto ad or something. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if there's I'd probably take the money. I'll be honest with you, because they're going to pay. Here's the thing that I tell my fellow talent: they're going to pay the whatever it is, and I don't care if you're right or left. Everybody has their thing of their evil empire that they wouldn't take money from, and I'm like, take the money, because you know what? They're going to pay somebody to do it, and actors, take the money. You can make a donation. You can donate the whole thing if you want to. Yeah. To something else, but you not taking the job doesn't stop them from doing what they do. The thing that stops them from doing what they do are people stopping spending money on their product. That's the only thing that stops companies. So you go ahead and take the money, and then, you know what I mean? Fight me on that on Twitter, you guys. But I'm also very much of the mindset where I know a lot of working actors who could, use the mortgage payment that month. So I'm like, just take the money. or they'll say like, I don't want to do a Walmart commercial because Walmart's a big corporation. I'm like, what? Just do it. Just take the money. And I'm like, if you lived anywhere where there's a Walmart, you would be shopping at Walmart, because Walmart is a big, it's a reality here. Yeah. And a lot of us have to go shopping and get our groceries from Walmart and get things from Walmart. So standing on principle of that, or like Amazon or whatever it is not going to keep them from paying somebody else to do the job. That's my thought. Anyway. I was really looking forward to speaking with you, because it really was that conversation you had with Nate. Although it was a very short conversation, because that was like 20 minutes long. I wish his episodes were launched long, because he has too much of a personality to keep that contained for that. He's a delight. Yeah, I love that guy. He's great. He's a good guy. But when I heard that conversation, it really was the perspective and how you delivered the knowledge you've had about ingredients and the history behind them and what, the real story behind oils and whatever the case may be. Having heard that and then listening to the various other conversations you had in the past, there was something about the way that you spoke and how you articulate those thoughts that were really, I thought, what's the best way I could describe it? That really had, it had a lot of purpose, I think is the best way I could describe it. There was something about those experiences you had have gone through that really spoke to me personally in a lot of ways, which led me to want to actually reach out to speak with you.
I'm glad you did.
Well, I'm glad I said yes too, and actually, I'm so glad you said yes rather quickly because I was probably a couple of weeks before I hear back from someone because that's usually the case here.
I'm a really fast responder.
Well, I appreciate that because it really did help out. But the point I'm getting is that I really took a liking to your story and the fact that you actually grew up in an area that I was born and raised in too. That actually was also another exciting factor too. But I guess with that being said, though, I can't thank you enough for your time here. But I know you mentioned earlier about a new book that you're going to be writing here. But is there anything else as well, too, that you may want to say in closing that anyone can be on the lookout for specifically because by the time this gets uploaded on the channel here, probably a few weeks from now. So around that time, is there anything in particular you would like to be able to share with anybody what to be on the lookout for specifically that you can more or less promote here, if you will?
Just find me on the internet. If you have any issues with anybody's trying low carb or keto or NSNG, no sugars, no grains, whatever you want to call it, find me on the internet. I have tons of free recipes. I totally believe in the freemium model of giving out as much free content as possible because I know people are looking for answers and people are sick and people are depressed. And it's, for me, the reason why when you say purpose, it's because I have a very strong purpose with this, which is to hopefully nourish people back to health through the use of food. And I mean, I might not have a lot of skills, but I'll make you smile and I'll give you a good recipe. And so it's like, I want people to feel better because I felt better when I changed how I ate. So just find me on the internet. I'm around. I'm not hard to find.
All right. So on that note, I guess we'll close there, but I want to say again, thank you for the camera. I want to say thank you so much for your time. And I really do wish nothing but great success for you. I'm going to say, in your future.
Also great sex. Thank you. Great success and great sex for everybody. That's what I wish for the world. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And so until next time, I hope we get to do this again here. And cheers to you.
Cheers to you.
All right.